You are all joining us here this morning. We'll give everybody a couple seconds to get into the meeting. Wonderful. Well, welcome to today's program, CMMC Right Sizing Solutions for Defense and Aerospace Suppliers of All Sizes. I'm Kate Canapo with the Pacific Northwest Defense Coalition, and my colleagues are also on the line. Let me introduce Denise Reiser, Carly Keith, and Bailey Simpson. We're all here to help you, so please feel free to chat to us if you have any questions. Today's program is presented by the Pacific Northwest Defense Coalition and CORTAC Group. Before we begin, we just want to make sure that we are all set here for our Zoom call today. Please turn on your camera if you are willing and able to do so. That does help our speakers make sure the information they're providing is connecting with you. And as PNDC as a community, it helps build those connections. We also recommend making sure that your name in Zoom is actually your name, and you can also put your company name in that field as well. If you're not familiar with how to do that, you can just use the click on participants here. You'll see your name in the upper right-hand corner here. Just click on it. You might need to click on more, and then you can rename yourself. Helpful if we're asking questions, we'll know who we're talking to. We also do have the chat available for you today. Please feel free to use this to ask a question or make a comment at any time. The speakers will also invite you to unmute and ask your questions at points during the presentation. Do keep an eye on the chat. We will try to write out some of the acronyms that invariably get used during a presentation like this, just to help everybody follow along. You can also download your chat. If there's anything you want to save from that, just click on the 3 dots next to the word chat here, and it will give you the option to download that to your computer so you can save that. The presentations and a copy of the slide deck will be sent to you after the event. And as a reminder, PNDC is a membership organization. If you're not already a member, we'd love to have you join our community that supports growing our member businesses, our regional economy, and our nation's security. So today here we are going to cover a few different topics. CMMC update, help you break through the confusion and hear the status of CMMC. We're very happy to have Jerry Leishman on the line, who actually sits on the National CMMC Accreditation Board Standards Workgroup. We'll hear about a step-by-step approach to prepare for cybersecurity requirements, and then lessons learned from an early adopter of CMMC. So all of us here at PNDC would like to thank CORTAC Group for your support and willingness to share your expertise on the program here today. I am going to turn things over to the group. Here, I will stop sharing my screen so you may start.
All right, let me get this up for everybody. There we go. Okay, let me put it in presentation mode. So welcome, thank you for attending. We're really excited today. You're going to meet the entire CORTAC team. We've been working at this for the last 18 months as a focused area of offers to our small and medium-sized businesses in the Pacific Northwest and nationally. And we're going to also bring in our CEO, Tom Ide, who we'll talk a little bit about just what our experience has been as an early adopter of NIST 800-171, DFARS, and CMMC Level 3 being audit ready. What you'll find about CORTAC is we've been in the defense industrial base for 12 years since the beginning of our company, focused on helping primes and subprimes win big contracts with the government. So we've always been there helping translate commercial to defense and government and helping win big deals. As part of that, We are a supplier ourselves, and that's one of the reasons why we've had to, as a company, become NIST 800-171 compliant and CMMC level 3, because we're a supplier just like you all. So we're going to talk a little bit about that from the CEO perspective. And then we've also worked with about 10 local Northwest companies, some small ones and some big ones. And we just want to talk about the experiences that that we're seeing with these companies, the actual kind of on the ground. In some cases, you can think of us as an advisor, an advocate, just trying to help them navigate the complexity of what it means to get DFARS, CMMC secure. And if you don't, you potentially could lose contracts in your business. So it's a big, hairy issue that the industry is facing. And so we're going to have Ace and Troy, who you'll introduce themselves in a second, kind of walk through what we're seeing actually working with customers here locally, the experiences, some of the challenges they feel, almost in a way of almost a therapist, because we're trying to help them understand that this is all doable, achievable, but you really need to break it down into a bite-sized sort of approach with right-sized solutions that are cost optimized for your organization. So we're going to spend the day talking about that for the next 90 minutes. So hopefully this is something will resonate here for you. You can always ask questions during the conversation or follow up with us afterwards. So, okay. Let me introduce the team. I'm Jerry, Executive Vice President at CORTAC, driving the regulatory business, anything to do with federal, ITAR, DFARS, import-export, FedRAMP, and CMMC. Kate mentioned I'm on the CMMC Accreditation Board. That's a national role. There's 15 of us that are in the standards group. We are translating the CMMC models that the DoD put out into understandable, practical, I'll call assessment guides or solutions that people can actually understand and go implement as an organization. That same information is being used by the auditors to figure out how to audit and what to look for. So it's a great place to be in terms of understanding what the auditor is going to look for when they come to your business. And the reason I can say that I can do that, I'm also one of the 100 provisional auditors that the DoD has trained up. I think I'm maybe the only one in the Northwest, but I'm also a registered practitioner, which is more of the consulting side. So between those three areas of just looking at the CMMC models and how to drive adoption, I and CORTAC bring a great perspective on what it's going to take to drive adoption across the industry. So I just wanted to share that. I want to introduce Troy, Ace, and Indy. And Troy, why don't you just tell a little bit about yourself, and then Ace, and then Indy.
Great, thanks. Hello, everyone. Very excited to be here. I've spent over 25 years in the Department of Defense and the intelligence community, protecting and working with national security issues. Really excited to apply that now to help protect the defense industrial base. And this is like a continued mission. Veteran, been around the world to all the Army's greatest vacation hotspots. And I'm glad to be in the Pacific Northwest.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Ace?
Thanks, Jerry. So I joined CORTAC about 9 months ago. Spent 30 years in this industry, the last 20 of which have been mostly focused on security. More from the commercial side, very interested in making sure that whatever security people get is right-sized to their needs and to their business, and to make sure that the security becomes a business enabler and not an inhibitor.
Excellent. Look forward to hearing your insights there, Ace. Indy, you want to share?
Good morning, all. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm a retired Navy officer in the logistics field. My experience with supply chain goes all the way back to the days of faculty at Naval War College, back before there was cybersecurity, and the threats back then seemed to be a lot simpler than they are today. I was a founding member of what became the federal government compliance program for the Microsoft Azure cloud. And I'm also a research member at a federally funded research and development center working on cybersecurity practices, including in critical infrastructure.
Thank you, Indy. Okay, we're going to jump in here, and some of these slides I presented at prior PNCC events, but I think it's really important to really understand the breadth and depth of what we're talking about here, and why we're even having this conversation about why cybersecurity, why me. it's, why does it affect me? So, well, just a little bit more about CORTAC. I mentioned 13 years, 100 people. You see, we work with primes, including Microsoft, some of the local companies here, LKD, Electro Impact, General Plastics. So and we're located here in Issaquah area. The big deal is cybersecurity is now a critical national security concern, as defined by the Department of Defense, as defined by both political parties and defined by the industry. And the primary reason that it's a national security issue for you and me is that the U.S. wants to stay ahead in the military advantages. We've got critical infrastructure that's really important for our day-to-day lives and our economic prosperity for not only us, but our kids and our grandkids. We really need to take this seriously. We haven't done a great job as a country for the last 20 years. Thinking about cybersecurity is bringing that to the homeland. We've all thought about missiles shooting across the oceans, but now it's being brought to the homeland, and it's become a national security concern. So it's top of mind for everybody. Just a quick set of scenarios where it actually has come to local companies that have been affected by this. In March, Visser Precision, they're out of Colorado, was actually breached, and they have some of our local companies here in the area, and there was ransomware included in that, and a exfiltration and public disclosure of that information. That was just in March through a small supplier, probably smaller than a lot of you on the phone. And I'm going to have Troy talk a little bit more about what that looked like, but this is happening to companies like that are in the Northwest every day. Another perspective is, Ellen Lord, from the former secretary, said that there's $600 billion worth of exfiltration annually. And in 2020, it's up to $1 trillion. And that $1 trillion is growing significantly probably in 2021, where it's even more profitable than the global drug trade. So if you think about from a risk standpoint, people that are moving drugs across borders and nefarious ways there, it's easier and it's more profitable to do cybersecurity and cyber theft now than global drug trade. So it's continuing to grow, and you add 5G and quantum computing. Suddenly you can see that this is not something that's going to slow down for the global countries as well as for the US. Just a quick summary of how big it is. 600 billion, that's actually up to 1 trillion in 2020 with lost. That's more than our federal defense budget last year. That's going out to other folks, and we paid for that with our own tax dollars. So I don't particularly like that, and I don't want to kind of fall short to the rest of the world by people stealing and then replicating our intellectual property. 300,000 folks in the defense industrial base. Obviously, all of you on the phone most likely are one of those. What's the most important thing here is the DoD spends a lot of money building, IP that's used for military and defense and aerospace. 80% of that IP flows through our supply chain, obviously managed and owned by the primes, but a lot of it is lost through the tier 3 through tier 6. And that's where the biggest vulnerabilities are in the industry. And that's why CMMC was created. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. On the other side, there's a lot of loss going through our university systems. Many of our universities have foreign nationals as students, but they're really not students per se. They're coming over to learn and take back to them to China. So there's just vulnerabilities all over the ecosystem that has made this just a really big problem. Now, this is where I'm going to turn it over to Indy, given his perspective, for many years, and really kind of put it into perspective what this means and what it means going forward. So Indy, I'd like to turn this over to you.
Very good. The Defense Department has been looking at supply chain cybersecurity threats since at least 2010. So the DFARS Rule 7012 that became effective in 2018 is actually the result of 3 rounds of industry review. And its first inclination was the need to put together a cybersecurity plan, look at your controls, do a self-assessment, and then go ahead and continue to manage your gaps. That became a requirement for anyone who was managing CUI And it was supposed to be flown down from the primes through various tiers, contractors. And if you had CUI, it was only a matter of time between those clauses were going to affect you. So let me give you a background, as there was actually two elements behind that in the dialogue. One was, as Jerry mentioned, the loss of intellectual property and its overall impact on the Defense Department's ability to provide sustained warfare fighting capabilities for the young men and women who are in the field and potentially putting their lives on the line. And we still have troops deployed in almost 70 countries worldwide in some capacity. But there was another important reason for that, and that's inference. Inference is that even something as innocuous as shipping foodstuffs or medical records can be put together and provide enough information to provide our adversaries understanding as to where those young men and women are and what they're doing. There's some obvious ones, such as people wearing fitness trackers, letting them be able to track company level and platoon level deployments in places like Afghanistan, for example. But there's less obvious ones, such as supply orders for chickens. So if you're wondering why even the most innocuous supplier has a level 1 in CMMC, that's part of the motivation and why you're seeing increasing emphasis here on even the small companies. So I thought you may want to have an idea as to what's the cost. Well, the cost of the company, you've heard various information. There's going all the way back to 2014, there was a study of questionable merit that 60% of small businesses that have a major cyber breach go out of business. We don't know. There's information from the Insurance Institute that a cyber breach will cost anywhere from $34,000 to $1 million to mitigate, depending upon the nature of the company, the size, and so on and so forth. But the real loss for those who are federal contractors is having people show up with badges and start asking some very hard questions about what have you done to maintain the security of that information, with the potential loss of your ability to do contracts with the government. So I'm not going to dwell on that, because if you're supplying the government today, then where are the trends going? And the trends are going to be, in my judgment, an acceleration. And I'd just like to point out some information here. So you may recall the Defense Authorization Bill for 2021, which was passed over President Trump's veto. Is before that, there were 304 bills in the last Congress related with cybersecurity. By the way, we're into the first week of the new Congress, and there's 4 already being proposed. So make no question, cybersecurity is becoming a big deal. Already 2 positions in the there's 2 positions which have been filled or will be filled with actual names in the Biden administration, with direct access to the chief of staff. So this represents the fact that the new administration is taking cybersecurity very seriously. The cybersecurity effort in the Department of Homeland Security was taking second fiddle to the emphasis on border security. I expect that's going to change, and those acting positions are going to be changed. And the reason is, in the Defense Authorization Bill of 2021, there are over 600 specific citations of cybersecurity, passed over 77 specific provisions on cybersecurity. So this reflects almost a decade-long bipartisan support for cybersecurity, and almost, if I'm looking at the numbers here, $740 billion in that bill for various cybersecurity activities. Specific provisions for CMMC, if you look at provision 1739, the new cyber threat hunting program specifically for the defense industrial base, and they're going to need information to go ahead and support that program. And what I believe that means, and many of the analysts believe that means, is this requirement to submit your security assessment reports is going to be backed up with renewed effort in the Defense Department. And there's already been a staffing position aligned at the political appointee to make that happen. The Congress mandated that by March, the Defense Department provide its program to accelerate CMMC and held funding to 60% until that report was done, how they're going to spend money to accelerate, and that term is used, accelerate CMMC. So the tea leaves are there and the wording is there that the government is getting serious about cybersecurity in the defense industrial base. So though the deadline has been moved out, the language in the bill, and I ask you, you're welcome to read that yourself, it's only about 5,000 plus words, not light reading for late at night. And I think you'll see where the trends are going. And the omnibus bill, there's several $1 billion that have been putting aside for cybersecurity, including in what's the civilian equivalent of defense industrial base. It's actually quoted, cybersecurity is quoted almost over 200 times in that bill, with specific requirements in the critical infrastructure, which includes part of defense industrial base. So my prediction is that the effort to extend the DFARS requirements and CMMC-like requirements into the entire federal procurement apparatus will probably be accelerated during this current administration. So if I was a betting person, is that if you want to be doing business with the federal government over the next few years, that you're going to have to ensure that the protection of your intellectual property, regardless of the business that you're in, needs to be forefront among the executive priorities in your company, just looking at the language in those two bills. Fortunately, what's also been put in those bills is money to help you as vendors, and particularly as small vendors, to help improve your cybersecurity, and a technology initiatives to help make those supporting technologies affordable. As buried down in the Buy America Act languages is an emphasis now in making those cyber defense technologies and IT itself both more available and more secure. So fortunately, I think you're going to see a convergence here between one side, the stick side of making it mandatory, and the carrot side of making it both affordable and effective. So later on, we can have questions. The last thing I'll leave you with is the solar wind has actually opened some eyes to the supply chain vulnerability, both because of the multiple components that were involved in the SolarWinds technology that allowed that exploit to take place, and the fact that once it was exploited, it was widespread through a multiple set of systems. It's really too early here to know what the full vulnerability was. I suspect it will probably be into the late spring, early, before more information is available. But it shows the interconnection And one of the things which has become very current here, which is why I'm putting this note out for us as people and for our leadership, phishing remains one of the largest vulnerabilities, one of the largest threat vectors to the protection of our systems and our intellectual assets. Thank you.
Thank you, Indy. You know, that was, I mean, I don't know what to say. That's such a great perspective for all of us. Thank you. All right, so just quickly, everybody should be aware that the interim DFARS rule went into effect December 1st. And that really requires you, if you have DFARS flowdowns, to now report your cybersecurity status of the NIST 110 controls up to the SPRS system. And that is now going to be used by DoD procurement to determine your profile for future acquisitions, both current new contracts as well as extensions, prior to CMMC. So this is a way the DoD is beginning to even enforce that the suppliers are actually doing their work, assessing, self-assessing, getting system security plans, incident response plans, which are part of the law if you accept DFARS flowdowns in your contracts by just signing them. They are asking you now to report it to hold you accountable. So that's really the thing that's here and now, right now for today. And there's probably about 35,000 suppliers out there that get some level of CUI, and only about 5 to 7 have actually reported up. Which means that there's a large gap of organizations that don't know what to do, haven't done it, and need to get that work done. Otherwise, you may be disqualified for future acquisitions starting today. So I just mentioned that. And then CMMC is Indy focused on is the broader next generation of DFARS, where all contracts will have a CMMC level requirement as part of the RFP process, and you'll have to get audited and certified prior to eligibility. That's kind of the next set of enforcement. And you can see that the first 7 contracts have been announced, 3 with the Navy, 3 with the Air Force, and 1 with Azure Cloud. So they're moving forward aggressively from a DoD standpoint. And as Indy said, other large agencies that have sensitive data, and I'll throw out Department of Homeland Security, Department of Energy, NASA, are all going to be quickly being required to tell them what their supply chain strategy is, and they're all going to go, wow, DoD's got CMMC, let's just adopt CMMC. If it's good enough for DoD, it's good enough for me. So this is just a guess. I would expect that to be coming soon. So if it's not going to be just DoD, it's going to be, as Indy said, not long, all federal agencies, because they all want to protect their data. And we've had breaches across the board in all agencies over the last 5 years. So just just kind of an observation there. So that's kind of the big picture on the update. Things are moving faster. The new administration, as Indy said, is going to probably accelerate that. Agencies are being asked and money's withheld from them. The default play would be to go to adopt CMMC and follow through on the DoD path. So that's kind of a quick update. So for those that you aren't familiar with CMMC, and most of you should be by now, if you're not, you need to get there, get going on that. But again, I wanted to just highlight the interim DFARS rules is the most important one for you to learn today. Unless you have one of those 7 contracts that you're working for, then you've got CMMC probably level 3 that you need to meet by June of this year. So your timetable just got reduced down to 6 months if you want to be a supplier that can receive that award. And just an FYI, as a provisional assessor from the CMMC AB, there's about 1,500 suppliers. They estimate that they're going to be part of those first 7 to 15 contracts. We will be helping those organizations go through their assessment process so they'll be prepared for those awards. But people, it's starting to get a little exciting out there, as you can imagine, if you're tied to one of those 7 contracts. All right, CMC, I'm just going to hit a couple highlights here. It's really part of DoD's overall information protection strategy. And again, even though we say cybersecurity is kind of the the latest and greatest. That's where most of the battle is happening right now. But we still have physical security that's been in place for many years, but now it's been extended to digital. So it's really information protection that the DoD is trying to get us to really take seriously: data governance, data protection. And cyber is just one of the attack vectors that are going on, and the most important, as we know. The DoD has also expanded what they want protected. Indy mentioned contract information that a chicken supplier may have at a base. I mean, that's in contracts that they are supplying chickens. It's not public record, but it's important. If they aggregate different data points, they can make predictions. So that's what they call federal contract information. And the majority of companies fall into that space. They don't carry controlled unclassified, like technical drawings or sensitive information. But if you do, then you fall into the CUI category, which by default puts you at a level 3 for CMMC. And if you carry any ITAR, you're at level 3 at a starting point for CMMC. So if you have that information, that's kind of where you're going to fall as you begin to evaluate what you're going to need to do. The big challenge here, or I should say cultural industry change, since the defense industry has never been under a regulatory regime like PCI, SOX, or HIPAA. CMMC and DFARS are really regulations that are coming into this industry to do business. A Gartner study says regulated industries usually invest 6 to 8% of the revenue on IT, cyber, or compliance to meet those regulations and protect the data. Gartner says the defense industry is about 1 to 2% of the revenue goes to those things. So you've got a 2% for defense and 6 to 8% for finance industries. There's a 4 to 6% gap in investments and protection that the CMC will close that gap. And so I just mentioned that there's a lot of work to be done there to get to where you need to be a regulated industry. If you're a prime, the DoD is putting more accountability on you to make sure your supply chain is secure as well. So anytime you go and bid for an RFP and you've got a team of folks, they're all going to have to be an approved CMMC level. Otherwise, they're going to be thrown out, and then you got to go find another supplier. So being CMMC as an early adopter makes you eligible for a lot more potential contracts with your customers. So that's why an early adopter approach is a good approach versus a laggard approach, where if you say, well, we're getting there, well, you're going to be bypassed for contracts because it's here and now right now. So think about being an early adopter. And then the key thing here, the last bullet point is this is not a one and done. NIST 800-171 is okay, give me a snapshot where you're at today. Great. CMMC is not about getting or one and done. It's about get there and stay there. So CMMC introduces processes that enable you to, basically you have to have a compliance and security program that's ongoing because it changes all the time and you have to keep it up to date. And that's been a failure in the defense space for quite a while, as they get it done and they walk away and forget about it. And a year later they come back. That's not this thing anymore. It's get there, stay there. And even worse, or not worse, but even more important is the DoD is starting with CMMC with a set of requirements. Every year they're planning on increasing that because the bad guys are getting smarter and more sophisticated. So we got to keep up with it. So this is not only a program, but it's going to be an increasing program with additional security and compliance requirements over time. So you'll need to think about it that way as a strategic part of your business operations and risk management as you move in the future working in the DoD or the federal government space. So that's the big picture on CMMC. It's about a new way of doing business in the 22nd century, I believe, where cybersecurity is a key part of protecting your customers' information as well as your own from cyber attack. So, just quickly, this is the kind of a summary of the CMMC. It's got the levels down the left side, levels 1 through 5. Each level requires a certain number of practices or controls, as we call them in NIST 171. Plus additional processes. And the more sensitive the data is, the higher the level in CMMC you go. And I mentioned if you've got ITAR or CUI today and DFARS flow downs, you kind of default to a level 3. So that's where most of you will probably land if you've got sensitive data through flow downs and contracts. Looking at it from the other side, so as being a provisional assessor, there's a couple key takeaways that I learned by going to the training on how the assessor that's going to come in and look at you is going to think about your business. first of all, it's not a checklist. It's a maturity model. And it's a maturity model based on your organization and how you do your business. So they are not they don't say you got to do it this way and that's the only way. No, they say, here's the requirement and you have to look at your organization to create the right solution that's sufficient to meet that particular requirement. So you do have the flexibility to figure out how that works for yourself. Documentation is hugely important here. If you don't have documentation, you're going to just, the auditor's going to walk away. You got to have policies and procedures. And the key word here is institutionalized, which means that you just didn't create the policy today and the auditor comes tomorrow. They want it to be institutionalized, which means the policy and procedures are there. People are following it. It can be observed and people know it. So you have to get ahead of that and change the culture, change the practices to really demonstrate that maturity of what institutionalization means. And at the end of the day, the DoD is trying to get you to think about security by design, security built into your business. And this is how they're doing it. And then they're tying contracts on the backside. If you don't do it, then you're too risky to work with us. So that's what the assessors are going to look like or look for: maturity, institutionalization, that you got your documentation and that your people know what they're doing. And it's just part of your culture. And if it's not, that's going to raise red flags, and then you're in a mitigation mode with the assessor. So they're taking it seriously. All right, so that's just, I wanted to share that from an assessor's perspective. Now, Kate is, I believe Tom is online. Can you open him up?
Yes, Tom. Yeah, Tom is on the line.
I am here.
Tom, you're good. So I'd just like to introduce Tom. Tom is our managing partner at CORTAC and has actually been is our CEO effectively. That's gone through this journey with since NIST 171, DFARS, and now CMMC. And we thought it'd be really important and insightful for him just to talk about his experiences, how he dealt with some of the decision points that you guys are trying to work through right now. So Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks everybody for joining. This is definitely a journey, and happy to kind of share our lessons learned here. My background is I served in the Air Force for a number of years, and actually I've been working in the defense industry for over 30 years. But the last 12 years, I've actually been doing a lot of work in the commercial industry, so with big companies like Microsoft and SAP. And so I have a very good understanding of the technology and the requirements out there. What I want to do today is just kind of go through some of the lessons learned. We started this journey at CORTAC, probably 5 years ago, as we started getting more and more inquiries from our customers as to what was our level of data security. For those of you who don't know us, we're predominantly a consulting firm, so we go out and help our clients on, critical projects, whether it be a proposal or a strategic implementation or a CMMC, preparation. So most of our work is out there with clients, and a lot of the CUI and other data that we need to secure is actually our client data. And so it's very important for us, from a reputational perspective as well as a security perspective, to make sure that that goes well. So like I said, this journey for us is lasted about 5 years, and we're pretty proud to say that we're CMMC level 3 audit ready, and we're looking forward to kind of going through that. So I want to walk through kind of 5 lessons learned that we had going through this, and feel free to ask questions if you have those. The first thing that I think really hit us is that we are about 50% commercial and 50% public sector in terms of our business. And I think we always think of the DIB as being predominantly just defense focused or other federal agencies, but what we found with most of our clients is that there's actually a commercial segment that they've moved into as part of a downturn in the economy or just diversification of their business. What we found personally is that we're actually living in a world now of multiple frameworks for data compliance and data security. The actual first one that hit us the hardest was GDPR, which I don't know if all of you are aware of that, but it's a privacy regulation that's is coming out of the EU that really is focused on personal data. And because of our clients like Microsoft and SAP that are global companies, even though it technically only applies to EU, it will actually, they've made a decision as a corporation to apply it globally. And so we started seeing a lot of flow downs from those clients around, securing private information, both theirs and ours. In the background, we started seeing the ramp up of NIST, and then ultimately the move to CMMC. And so, while those the data that you're protecting is sometimes different, the tools that you use to protect it and the policies you use are very similar. And so it presents some challenges because you want to not sub-optimize, for each of those individual frameworks. We also, just recently were required by one of our large clients to get cybersecurity insurance. And what we found is that the insurance requirements themselves were perhaps the most stringent and the most difficult to meet, largely because if we had a breach, that insurance company would have to pay out, a certain degree of money. And so they're very, very careful to make sure that that everything is all buttoned up. So the real key, what we found is, you've got to take all of these different frameworks and kind of throw them in a blender and try to figure out how to write a system security plan and an associated, implementation that is optimized for the broader range of frameworks that you have to comply with. And I think there's also, some unknown in the future because we don't know, what's coming next. I mean, like with GDPR, we know that California has implemented some requirements. We're expecting, Washington and Oregon to do the same. And so we have to also be, very nimble in terms of being able to adapt as these frameworks change over time. The second big lesson learned we had is, that policy changes are cheaper than infrastructure implementations. And so I'm an engineer, and I was, taught very early in my career that if you can make changes to a design of a system early on, you can get a 10 times impact on the cost versus trying to make a change, downstream. And so the same applies for implementations, like NIST and CMMC. Most companies, and I will honestly admit, including us, jump right into an IT solution. So when they hear that they have to get their data secure, they're immediately calling up Microsoft or AWS and asking for, what solutions do they have to make the data secure. But what we found, I think, through this journey is that the policy work needs to really happen first. So not only do you have to put all those different frameworks in a blender, but you've got to focus on, policies that are integrated. One of the key things you learn in data security is employee behavior is a key driver. And so being able to use policy to control employee behavior is really key. So to give you like an example, like I said earlier, a lot of our CUI that we're exposed to is at our client locations. And so we made a policy for certain clients that our employees were not allowed to put that client's CUI on our infrastructure. And we put controls in place to make sure it didn't happen. We trained our employees to make sure they understood it as they went into any given project. And we were able to avoid, a large infrastructure investment to support our client's CUI in certain cases, by doing that. So, so a big lesson there is, spend the time up front working on policy, working on your, the different processes that you put in place for your employees, and then use that information to help inform your IT decisions as you move forward. The third big lesson learned for us is you really got to focus on the entire chain of custody for data. Those of us who have been around a long time remember, when it was easy, right? So you had a piece of paper, the paper said ITAR on it, you knew to put it in a drawer, you knew to, that when you transported it, what you had to do with it in your briefcase. So things are very simple. And a lot of the defense industry employees, grew up in that environment. But as we move to more complex, IT infrastructures, what we found is that a lot of employees don't really understand that. They don't understand the difference between where things and how things are transmitted. And especially with companies that have moved towards, cloud-based tools such as O365, there's a lot of confusion around, where is that email actually sitting? How is that data transmitted? And so it's really important to kind of break that down and really treat those separately. It also gives you some kind of extra levers because you do have the ability, for instance, to store certain types of data on your laptop as long as it's got BitLocker or it's encrypted. The key is how do you get that data to your laptop? And so a lot of times people forget the risks that exist there, and so it's important to walk people through like, okay, how did you get this information and where are you storing this information, and working solutions in both areas. I think this is especially important today with everybody working in remote locations. We don't know how secure home offices are. Some folks, who can't work in their home office are, still going out and using public Wi-Fi. And so, they've created a lot of transmission risks that they don't know, even though they think they're all buttoned up from a storage perspective. So make sure you understand where your data sits at rest and where your data sits, when it's in motion. The fourth thing, and this is something, more of an outcome for us, is that, compliance fosters, peace of mind, efficiency, and pride. And this certainly happened, over the holidays when the SolarWinds breach came out. We were very happy to know that, we were CMMC, level 3 audit ready. So we felt very confident in our data. I think, in reading some of the reports about that, what you found is that, SolarWinds was a company that did not go through this journey. And so, it exposed them to certain vulnerabilities. So it's very nice to know that we don't have to worry as much. Obviously, we want to get to level 4 and level 5, so there's still journey ahead of us. The other thing that, we found is that it takes a lot of time to, at least for us, to fill out customer surveys. So if you're a subcontractor to, some of the big primes like Lockheed and BAE Systems and Northrop, you're going to get, questionnaires every year. And those questionnaires can be, very detailed. They can be difficult to go through. I personally spent a lot of time with my IT folks going question by question, because in some cases, we weren't compliant. And not only do we have to explain why, but we had to give them a plan for, when we were going to become compliant. Now that we've kind of gone through the journey, we're much more efficient. We're able to actually get these questionnaires done very quickly. We're able to send documents to our customers that look very professional and buttoned up, and it's just made the whole kind of internal operations more efficient for us. And I think the other big thing we've learned is that there's a certain degree of pride, because I think originally people thought of compliance as just something you had to go do, almost like a burden. But what we found is that in today's environment, especially with some of these requirements showing up in RFPs, that compliance is now a competitive advantage. And as Jerry has built out this practice and got familiar with a lot of folks in the industry, what we found is that, most folks are behind a little bit, power curve. And so for us, it's a competitive advantage for us with our customers to be able to say that we're compliant with their frameworks, and they can trust us, with their data, especially on those strategic projects, where there are must wins for them, or things that we're helping them with that are gonna have a major impact on their business. And then the last thing is, this is just more of an input to you, which is, right size your expectations during your compliance journey. Everybody is going through this journey together. They're working hard to figure it out. When we first started this 5 years ago, it really started with a questionnaire that we received from Lockheed Martin that was very intimidating. It was 80 pages long. I didn't really have a full-time IT person yet. And so I sat down and went through a couple hours through the questionnaire. And it was very eye-opening, because one, there was a lot of things in the questionnaire that we had never even thought of. It also was very tuned to, more on-prem services. We at CORTAC, built our company in the cloud because of, we're very dispersed with our client base. And, it was very hard to answer yes to a lot of the questions when you provide, when you have a lot of your stuff on cloud services and cloud applications. And so when we finished that survey, we turned it in, and the score we got back was 4%. And so we were, we immediately thought, we're going to lose our contracts with our biggest client. And what we found is that we didn't. They wanted to work with us, and we started the journey. And so in the last 5 years, we've got from 4% to 100, and it took a while. It took a lot of work. The other thing I think we've learned is that the solutions being offered by industry are not necessarily, ready for prime time. So, There's been a lot of focus by, Microsoft and Amazon to get their cloud, systems like Azure and AWS GovCloud up to speed. But when you kind of go down to the next level around productivity solutions, there's still work to be done. O365 GCC High is kind of the go-to solution for a lot of companies, and its functionality lags a little bit the commercial versions. So it frustrates people at times because maybe they can't do all the things in Teams or other solutions that they had done before. But I can tell you, because we are actually helping internal at Microsoft with their GCC High, that they are working very hard to get things to where it needs to be. And so just be patient there. And I think if you go to the next level down, which is kind of the random business applications, you'll find the same thing. A lot of these companies that we use to run our back office are starting the journey also. And so you just have to, set the expectations correctly there. The other thing as part of that is, goes hand in hand is the change management side. So just making sure that you don't just approach this as an IT, problem or a policy problem. You've got to go make sure that the employees are going on this as they start getting into things that aren't, necessarily familiar to them, or it's different than what they're used to. You've got to kind of work that from a change management perspective. So don't forget kind of that individual side of these implementations to make them successful. So overall, those, obviously there's a lot of, very tactical level lessons learned. These were kind of the big ones from a strategic perspective. I'm sure all of you will face some of these as you go through the journey. But hopefully you can learn from the efforts of others and avoid some of those missteps. So I'm happy to take any questions. Jerry, I don't know how much time we have, but if everybody has any.
Yeah, why don't we hold the questions till the end, because I want to get Ace and Troy, and then we can just collapse them all together there at the end. I assume that there's quite a few, Kate. So why don't we aggregate those and just cover the key ones at the end if possible.
Perfect, perfect. And I'll remind attendees they're welcome to type their questions in, or we'll call for them in a little bit.
Okay, so Ace, I'm going to turn it over to you guys and let you go.
All right, thanks, Jerry. Can you all see our presentation?
Yes, we definitely see it. Go ahead and put it in presentation mode. Perfect.
Great. So, I think we've shared a good amount of information today. Talked a lot about the government's perspective and perhaps a high-level business perspective. Wanted to bring a little bit of additional perspective, which is kind of where the rubber meets the road. So, by way of further introduction, I'm kind of the technical guy on the team. I'm responsible for defining our solutions. Troy is responsible for what I lovingly call customer love, delivery. And so, we're the ones that are talking, most directly and working most directly with you all. And, so wanted to share a little bit of the feedback and that we've heard, and give more specific directions or suggestions about how we might be able to proceed. So one of the big things that we've heard is, all right, the DoD has been talking about the DFARS rule. Indy explained, I think, pretty extensively why they regard it as important. But, and realistically, the contractual obligations have been in place for several years. And yet we still hear from a number of our clients, why is this happening? Or more specifically, why is this happening to me? They've been saying, hey, I've been fine up to now, and now all of a sudden the government is adding all these regulations, and oh my gosh, it's like huge. And this is way too expensive. We're running on really tight margins, and they're concerned that that they're never going to get this money back because they feel like they can't pass along the cost in the contracts. And then they also say, hey, look, DFARS 7012, CMMC, ITAR, all that's the government's problem. Why are they making it my problem? And so as a result, the tendency is to say, well, how do I just basically make this go away? So, wanted to just acknowledge some of those feelings that are out there. Say, we do hear them a lot, and can empathize with them to a certain extent, you know, there really are ways that we can make this better. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So I'm going to hand it over to my friend Troy. You know, so I kind of described, you know, what we're hearing from our clients. I'm going to hand it over to Troy to explain, even at a broader level, a bit of the DoD's perspective.
Great. Thanks, Ace, and thanks, everyone. Customer love, I appreciate that. So love is a battlefield, all right? Pat Benatar, I got to quote her. It is a battlefield, and I want to talk about what DoD's perspective is, having been deployed, counting on, you know, people like you, your companies, to give me the equipment and my teams the equipment we need when we're downrange. The support that we get, it's really critical. Think about this from a different perspective, though, for a moment. Imagine you have a irrigation system in your home, or you have a water bill that's kind of creeping up slowly over time, and you don't know why. It's this slow leak, these slow leaks from, you know, an irrigation system, a leaky faucet, your dishwasher, whatever. All these slow leaks affect your bill at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, whatever it is. That's what's happening in DoD, in our supply chains. It's a slow leak. All of our DIBs, our peers, our colleagues, friends are being slowly attacked, and that's because they're open, they're vulnerable, and they're just not really aware of what's going on. It's kind of like that slow leak in your house. You don't notice it until 3 months later when you get that bill, and you're like, "Why is my bill so high? What happened?" Well, that's what's happening now. The DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, is exposed, and it is a ripe target for our adversaries throughout the world. And, you know, I understand, you know, you go to work, you want to make your products, and you want to go home at the end of the night and be with your family. Many of those products support my colleagues, my friends, my former, you know, peers and current peers in the military, and we appreciate that work. But, you know, the adversary recognizes that the DIB is a ripe target. Economic warfare is so much easier today to accomplish. There's no regulations that are preventing foreign countries, foreign adversaries, cyber criminals from attacking these clients. And that's a big problem. You, as a business owner, you work hard to build your company. You've got some unique skills, you've got some unique product, your intellectual property. All that's very important to you, and you work hard to create that and create that company. These cyber criminals, these adversaries, they see that as easy pickings. You know, they can get in, get out, take it, steal it, manipulate it, reuse it. And many countries are doing that to our disadvantage. And while we can out-manufacture many companies, we're getting behind in other areas. And that's what the DoD has finally said. We can't keep up. We're fighting a war of attrition, and our adversaries are now attacking our defense industrial base. So that's kind of, you know, what's happening, and the DoD is looking at this at a broader perspective than we are, because we operate locally and run locally. And again, IP is very lucrative. Intellectual property is very lucrative. I can get it and I can resell it as a cyber criminal to a competitor. I can also affect your company's ability, you know, as a cyber criminal, your company's ability to gain market share, or affect them to lose market share. And you'll see more of that as you start to read and become aware of these things. So I don't want to say that to scare you. I want to say that to give you the context. The battlefield is everywhere now because of cyberspace. And DoD said, we've got to find a way to fix this. We've got to bring our suppliers on board, and CMMC is a great first attempt to get everyone to participate. With that said, what I'd like to talk about is a peer of ours who went through a breach recently, about a year ago, and kind of what happened there. Visser Precision, great company, does a lot of work out of Colorado. They had a data breach that was recognized by a security researcher. This security researcher was online in the dark web and found a lot of their confidentiality agreements and in NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, that had the companies that they were doing business with in them. For example, some of those were SpaceX, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, et cetera. that data was on the web, and that's contract information. That's not intellectual property, but it is contract information, and it tells you a lot about who they do business with. And if you look at what Visser does and you look at who they're doing business with, you may gain a competitive advantage from that. Even a foreign company may try to gain a competitive advantage. So that's happened. And what's interesting about this one in particular is they got a ransomware attack that encrypted their data and then asked ransom for that. And on top of it, threatened to release their data, including their intellectual property, which has a lot to do with how they do their manufacturing, who they're manufacturing for, pricing. What are their prices? That's very competitive and very dangerous pricing information, right? There's just so many facets to that. If that's lost and that's publicly available on the internet, again, it puts the company at a disadvantage. And then their primes, their suppliers kind of go, yeah, maybe I want to revisit this. I might want to deal with other companies that have better cyber hygiene. Visser was a victim. We don't know the details of what they have in place, but it's a peer, it's a colleague, it's someone in our industry that was impacted by this, and it's very, very close to home. Again, they're located in Colorado, not far from us. And up and down the West Coast, there are all kinds of attacks happening on a daily basis. Many of them are not reported, and it's pretty stressful. And as Tom had stated, having a compliance package and having compliance gives you some peace of mind, and it just kind of helps you be prepared. CMMC does give you some of those guidelines and boundaries to kind of give you that plan that you need to do things that you had never considered before. And again, I'm going to refer to Tom for a second. As he read through that 80-page document from a prime, there were things that he had never considered before. And as we interview customers and talk to customers, we're finding that we bring things to the table that they had never considered before. While I am responsible for customer love, I appreciate that one, Ace. I bring a lot of physical security and technical security advice to our clients. And we look at things from a team perspective to say, hey, these are things you may not have considered. So I just want to stress that real quick. Ultimately, Visser did not pay that we know of. And I believe the case has gone to litigation. Hopefully they're going to get some reimbursement for what happened. But if you think about what's happening, ransomware that encrypts your day-to-day operations impacts your ability to create your product. And if your product is really special and really unique and the intellectual property is then given away on the internet, you've lost a lot of time and development effort. And that can be very, very stressful for you as a business owner and your team. So thanks.
And I'd like to build on something that Troy noted as well, is that so many of our clients, and historically, not only in the DIB but just across industry in general, say, well, you know what, I recognize that there are some problems with my cybersecurity, but you know what, I'm just a small company. What, nobody's really going to pick on me, and the odds of anything happening are pretty remote. But ransomware and some of the other things have really changed that calculus quite a bit. The bad guys really, they're targeting the DIB, but sometimes they're just not targeting you at all, and that you'll just kind of get hit randomly with, like a phishing email that Tom alluded to. And all it takes is one person clicking on a link in one of those phishing emails that invokes the ransomware, that invokes other kinds of attacks, and and the bad guys can be in your environment. So it's important to recognize that it really can happen to anybody at any time. Again, not trying to scare you, that's not our tactic, but it is important to recognize that it can happen. Okay, so with all that said, we need to recognize here, we've said in a bunch of different ways that there is a need, there's multiple reasons, and the truth is that this is going to cost you some money. So we want to say, hey, from our perspective, we see 4 options for how to respond to this. One is to go big. and to proactively secure your data and your whole business, recognizing that, you know, the regulations require you to protect the DoD's business, but there is an opportunity to protect your entire, the DoD requires you to protect their data. There's an opportunity for you to protect your entire business. And, you know, we have approaches for doing that. A second option is to go narrow and just say, all right, I need something now. I need to comply with the regulations. I need to protect the DoD's data. So that it just ends up being a minimal solution to meet those compliance objectives. We'll talk about that more in a second. The third option is to do something a little bit in the middle, where you fix some of the security deficiencies, you write the documentation, which, oh, by the way, actually is a good amount of the requirements of NIST 800-171 and CMMC is that documentation. And much of this is documentation, security policy, procedures, processes, that kind of stuff that people have never really written down. So you can go back and write that documentation and then, you know, prepare for a CMMC contract and hope that you get it done before a CMMC contract, before a contract that requires CMMC comes across your desk. And then the fourth option, and we certainly wouldn't recognize that, recommend this, but we do want to recognize that it is an option, which is to do nothing, you know, to break your contracts and to lose data. Again, we don't recommend that, but you know, there is a business decision. You all are business owners, and so, you know, you do have an option to make that business decision for yourself. So we regard there as being a business opportunity in all of this. We've touched on these in a number of ways, but, you know, from a competitive perspective, if you demonstrate that you're lower risk than the next person, there is an opportunity for you to win business. What we found is that smaller organizations can actually be more agile than the larger organizations. Sure, they're challenged in some respects from a cash flow perspective, but once you get over that hump, there's an opportunity for a smaller DIB to win business and market share. And with respect to not being able to recover costs, what we figure is that over time, this is all going to balance out. Everybody's going to have to do this. So what that means is that the rates that you charge are going to balance out, and you'll get the money back. From a business perspective, beyond that, you know, IT exists to help people run their businesses better, to gain more efficiency. We IT people sometimes tend to forget that the computers don't exist for their own magnificence, and that they exist to support what people want to do with them. And so this is an opportunity to re-engineer some of the IT that maybe hasn't been working very well. And, you know, you can lower your personnel costs, you can improve productivity, and you know, if you want to go into a new business, there's an opportunity to support that as well. And then once again, from a security perspective, the DoD is having you secure their data. You can gain value by protecting your business and your data along with their stuff. So your financial information, your personnel information, or maybe some other intellectual property that isn't even related to the DoD. You know, all of that is susceptible to ransomware or theft or any of those kinds of things as well. So there's an opportunity for you to just secure your business. So I'll hand it back to Troy to chat about these next few slides.
Thanks, Ace. I appreciate that. One thing I did want to mention before I go into this, when data is stolen, especially if it contains what's called PII or personally identifiable information, sometimes there can be fines associated with that, and it also affects your brand. So not only do you have the risk of losing intellectual property, but you have the risk of losing your employees' personal data. So I didn't get a chance to mention that earlier, so I just wanted to share that. But what do you need to look for? What should you be looking for? Well, first, you want to find a trusted advisor to help you with this process. It's a journey, as Tom alluded to, and as Indy has shared and Jerry has shared. It is a big and complex journey. It's not impossible. It's a journey, and we're all going through it together. So you want to find people with a wide variety of expertise to give you the different viewpoints you need to understand the whole process and to find those gaps and things that you may not have considered or thought of when you start the journey. And to allude back to a point Tom brought up, perspective, adjusting your perspective to understand what you want and what's realistic. The next thing to kind of consider is what kind of predefined solutions exist that can get you most of what you need, get you secure, and keep you compliant, and then what's available at a reasonable cost. Back to some other points that have been said, policy is much cheaper than engineering solutions, but many times, your environment, your culture, is there a fit for the security solutions that you're looking at? And do they fit in your environment? Can you meet them with the right policies? So it takes some time to look at those things. Those are factors most people don't consider because, again, as it's been stated, most people go right to the solutions, the technical solutions. And the next thing I want to talk about real quick is allocating funding. Right now, there's funding that is available that's out there through what are called MEPs or Manufacturing Extension Partnerships from NIST. They have grant money. Matter of fact, we are working with Impact Washington, and they have some grants for Washington-based manufacturers. Under the CARES Act, the previous one, and hopefully the next one, I haven't read it yet, there's also funding for cybersecurity, and some of the counties in Washington state have given those grants to manufacturers. I can't speak for Oregon yet. We haven't gotten the news there, but start looking at funding that may be available for you to help get this project going. It is a long-term initiative for many companies. For the smaller, nimbler ones, this might be a fast way to get you started. Yeah, so what I'd like to do is break it down and talk about the phases and how we tackle some of this and what you should consider. First part is, where are you, right? You need to have a really good understanding of where you are in relation to where you want to be. And that goes to a good understanding of your business, your culture, your processes, what's in place, what kind of contracts you have, or what kind of contracts you'd like to have. And are you pivoting from 90% commercial, to 90% defense, right? Are you making a big pivot, or do you have a business that's 50-50 right now? Or do you have a business that has zero Department of Defense business and you'd like to consider doing that? One other thing to keep in mind is there are so many frameworks out there. That is really a big concern. And as Tom mentioned, it's like putting them in a blender, right? Well, one thing to keep in mind, if you're following a framework, for example, say 853 FISMA, now you have an opportunity to also knock out the CMMC one, right? Or maybe you want to consider one or two that opens up other markets that are not just Department of Defense, but it gives you an opportunity to pursue contracts with the rest of the federal government. As Jerry alluded to, Department of Energy has requirements, NASA has requirements, and even Department of Homeland Security has specific requirements. So there may be some opportunities for you to pick a framework and then be prepared to pivot with minor adjustments. So you got to know where you're at. So that readiness assessment is the best way to get there. We understand your culture, you understand it, you understand what you want, where you want to go. And then it's time to look at solutions. What's going to fit in your environment from a technical standpoint? We've interviewed lots of customers with different solutions and talked with them and heard their pain points. They picked a great solution that met the need and got them to a place to be compliant. But then suddenly when they went into the manufacturing portion, the solution didn't fit and they had to go back and adjust it. So, that readiness assessment prepares you for the right size solution. Once you have a solution that you like, you're going to grow with it. It's going to grow with you. And then you got to think about day-to-day operations. How are you going to maintain it? How are you going to support it? How are you going to staff it? Do you have people to staff it, or do you want to have someone else staff it for you? And that's where we talked about finding a trusted advisor. Word of mouth is great. Referrals, peers, talking to peers like on this program, another fantastic resource to find out and hear about those pain points. What I want to talk about now are some common gaps that we have been discovering. The biggest one, and this has been alluded to several times, is documentation. What kind of policies do you have in place? The policies that maybe were written when the company was formed 10 years ago, 20 years ago, probably aren't relevant and probably haven't been updated to reflect the change in business. And many companies don't have a person to go back in and redo those policies. You have compliance requirements and guidance from OSHA. You have requirements for your contracts. There's so many things, that you have to look at. And now we're asking you, the Department of Defense is asking you to say, hey, now we want you to do what's called a POEM. What's a POEM? Well, it's a plan of action and milestones to get your business secure. What's a system security plan, an SSP? You've got to submit that to SPURS. Oh my gosh, all these acronyms, right? Well, this is all part of documentation. And most of our clients are failing in this area. They just don't have the documentation that they need. The next big gap is security and compliance programs. Very, very few of our clients already have a security and compliance program in place. They have a little bit of cybersecurity. They have an IT guy, maybe two, or an IT gal, maybe one or two, but they don't have a compliance person. And they kind of throw that onto somebody as an additional duty. And that person has so much responsibility, he or she can't keep up. And they've got to be brought together. Your security program and your compliance program need to converge. They help each other, they complement each other, and you can leverage the strengths of each to meet the requirements and to, strengthen your position, if you will. And the next gap is technical solutions. What kind of solution do you want? What kind of solution works for you? What can fit? Can you go to a cloud solution? Can you go to an enclave solution hosted on premise? Maybe it's a hybrid. You've got some cloud stuff, you've got some operational stuff on prem. What solutions exist and what solutions actually fit. So these are some of the more common gaps that we're discovering with our clients in the client base that's out there. And then the implementation portion of those technical solutions and the ongoing maintenance of that is a big gap as well. So that's all I've got right now, Ace.
Hey, Troy and Ace, why don't we let's open up for questions. We only got about 10 more minutes to go. I know you got a few more slides.
Sure.
I think there's quite a few good questions out there, and if you guys are okay with that.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I know we have lots of questions, and I appreciate some people are answering them within the chat as well. But let's get to the few of these. This question is particular to Tom, but I invite any of you to answer it. How did CORTAC start their journey themselves? What's that first step in this journey?
Well, I think I mentioned a little bit about how, we started getting questionnaires from our customers, and that was really kind of a key driver for us to start becoming more aware and moving down the path. I think ultimately we got to a point where the customers were going from, just asking for information to starting to request, compliance documentation and plans to become compliant. I think one of the big challenges we had there was, we did what most firms did. We called up Microsoft and said, hey, do you have an Azure solution that would work for us? And what we got was a list of, 5 or 6 partner companies, and we were told to go call them. And when we made those calls, what we found was, they couldn't really help us. They were like, what are your requirements? Well, we have this, mixed bag of frameworks, and, they didn't know, they weren't able to take our requirements in and figure out, what the policies were. And so we were getting referred around to law firms. We ultimately got referred to a great little company, but not a company that could really scale to the level of supporting the whole DIB. And so what we kind of learned from that is that you really need to focus on, an end-to-end solution. And so that's one of the reasons why, Jerry has kind of stood up our practice internally to help, other companies is how do you take that and have a trusted advisor and really focus on end-to-end, the whole journey from, frameworks and requirements to policies to technical implementations and operations.
Right. Thank you. One question here, how do you determine what CMMC level you will need to be?
I can probably take that one, and maybe Indy or Ace, you can add to it. Really, there's just some basic questions. If you have ITAR data being passed into your systems, the DoD says that's a CMMC level 3 by default. The second check is, do you have any sensitive information like CTI or CDI that if lost, it could jeopardize, the DoD or your own organization. So it's sensitive, it's valuable. And there's a whole list by the archives up there, DoD, it defines what CUI is. But generally, if you got a DFARS flowdown already today, that is CUI that's coming your way. And that would put you again at a CMMC level 3. If you don't have technical information used to manufacture something, and it's more of a services business like a restaurant or landscaping, where it's not really sensitive data, but it does give the information that could be detrimental to the firm, then you become a CMMC level 1. And those are more service oriented toward companies that aren't making precision products like the DoD needs for missiles and aircraft carriers. Those always will default to a CMMC level 3. Anybody have anything to add to that?
So what I'll add to that is, for CUI, the government is committed to labeling that material. The rub is that under the rules, you can independently make CUI in conjunction with a government contract. So the rule of thumb would be is if you're uniquely creating information associated with a technology that is specifically customized for the government, the best practice, I'm emphasizing that, best practice is to treat it as level 3, because level 3 is really the basic level for comprehensive cybersecurity. So when in doubt, default to level 3 if you're providing customized technology or information associated with that for the Department of Defense.
I would add too that the big unknown, I think, for everybody is that the intent is to start rolling these down through RFPs. And so if you're a subcontractor, it's really important to know, the program that you're working on for the prime, and what is the requirement on that specific program from that specific customer. And it'll become a requirement, I think, going forward, that if you want to be part of that team on that specific program, you'll have to meet the requirement of that RFP as it comes out.
One quick thing to note as well is that we've been talking about level 1, level 3. We haven't talked about levels 4 or 5. So just real briefly, levels 4 or 5, the DoD is focusing on sort of level 3 and below for now, but just recognize that level 5 applies if you have classified information. Thus far, there hasn't been a real focus on it, but if you deal with classified information, you need to hit a higher bar.
Understandable, right? There's a lot of chat about help with making this affordable, help with grants to the MEPs, Jerry, that you mentioned. And I don't know, Jerry, if you have some comments on that, or I can definitely invite people to call PNDC and we can help navigate that as well.
Yeah, no, we recognize that there's only 3 ways to kind of get this funded. One, the DoD pays every supplier to get CMMC level 3. Probably not going to happen. You get your customers, your primes that you're supporting to pay it for you. And that might happen if you're the only one in the industry that makes a product and they need it. But if they're going to pay you to get up or give you the money to upgrade it, your environment, they might as well just buy you. So there might be some M&A there. The third is to fund this through grants, which is what we're seeing through the MEPs, which is managed at the state level. I know that Impact Washington had $1 million grant. I think most of that money has been allocated out. I do know that Colorado has a similar grant. I believe Michigan has done a similar grant, and they're kind of testing out the grant process to see if it really makes an impact to the manufacturing base. I believe it does. I believe in some of the new law, rules that are coming out that Indy referred to. There's a lot of money in there that will be flowing out through the DoD into the MEPs, the Impact Washingtons, the Oregon folks. Not there today. But to me, that's the best way to get money out to smaller or medium-sized businesses that can't afford to do it themselves. But there is, Troy mentioned, there's also some through CARES. It's down to the county level. Now, how you track that and where you manage that, I don't have a good idea other than just call around to your Chamber of Commerce and the folks that work as that public-private intermediary for you to see what is available. And 4 of our clients have taken advantage of that county grant funding in Snohomish County and then with Impact Washington.
And I'll add to check back the second half of the year. As I mentioned, both the Defense Authorization Act and the Omnibus Bill had various provisions for studies and other provisions. The ultimate objective is to provide assistance for the defense industrial base and staffing positions to help activate those. Some of those had spring and early summer deadlines. And so I think we'll see some movement here once those positions get staffed up and those programs get underway.
Yeah. And the question that was asked about getting started, I think we have found, and Jerry, you've worked with many of our PNDC members and been very generous with having conversations with people on where to start. I know Ace, Troy, Indy, you've all been involved in these. So I do encourage you to reach out. PNDC is happy to make introductions, but start these conversations. Grant money may be coming, but the timeline to get compliant can be a year plus easily.
Yeah, no, for sure. Just depends on how much investment you made in your data protection. If you've already been working in the DFARS and you're NIST 800-171 compliant, it's a pretty, not an insignificant, but you're already 3/4 of the way there to get to CMMC level 3. There's only 20 additional practices. But the real difference is processes, which is the kind of integrating a cultural change to your company. That is a hard thing to do, but technically you're already most of the way there.
Right, thank you. I know there's additional questions. We will send out the PowerPoint slides and a recording of this presentation, as well as contact information at CORTAC Group to address any additional or specific technology questions, etc. I really appreciate you joining us here today. This is good. You're taking a step to get cybersecurity. And thank you to all our speakers for sharing their considerable expertise. We really appreciate it. Do look in your PNDC newsletter. We'll let people know about opportunities for grants, etc. when they do come up. And also check out pndc.us for a list of upcoming events. I know we have one of our popular coffee and conversation events next week, which is an online networking program that will share some information about resources in the aerospace and defense industry. So thank you again, everyone. Any parting words from our speakers?
No, like I said, this is a journey. You got to get there and then stay there, and the rules are going to change as the bad guys get more sophisticated. So it's part of your business operations going forward, and you need to invest accordingly. Not to scare you, it's just the reality of our new world. So, be an early adopter and go win more business and use this as a competitive advantage. That's kind of my key takeaway. If you're a laggard, you're not going to be in a good position when the tide hits you and you're not prepared.
Right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and stay safe.
Thank you, Kate. That was great.
Thanks, Kate. Bye, everyone.
Right. Everyone have a great day.